So I want you to imagine a drone.
Okay.
And, we usually picture this sleek, silent marvel of modern aerospace engineering,
Mm.
right? Like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Right. Highly advanced stealth tech, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But this is not that. I mean, this thing sounds exactly like a loud, obnoxious lawnmower. It flies no faster than like a standard car cruising on a highway.
Mm-hmm.
And the crazy part is, its guidance system is literally cobbled together using consumer-grade microchips.
Yeah, smuggled across borders through a shell company.
Right. So now picture that this exact piece of cheap, almost absurdly low-tech equipment has just sparked a massive geopolitical crisis. And it's happening just 90 miles off the coast of Florida.
It really is wild.
It's drawing these direct, chilling comparisons to the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
So welcome to U.S. affairs. We are jumping into a rapidly unfolding situation right on America's doorstep, and you are going to want to hear this.
Yeah, the speed at which this dynamic is shifting right now is just unprecedented. I mean, the implications stretch way far beyond the Caribbean.
I feel like the audio must be more than 50 months if we were to cover every single tiny detail of these reports. But we have a mission today. We are unpacking a stack of recent intelligence reports, military posture statements from U.S. Southern Command, and academic aerospace analyses. We need to figure out how Cuba reportedly acquired over 300 Iranian-made suicide drones.
And we really have to look at a scenario where the fundamental rules of military deterrence are just being rewritten in real time. You've got this seemingly primitive technology combining with highly sophisticated geopolitical maneuvering between Havana, Tehran, and Moscow.
Yeah, and an escalating standoff involving the Oval Office, the CIA, and the Cuban government. But, I mean, we really need to start with the machine itself.
We do, yeah.
Because the specs on this thing are just this bizarre mix of terrifying and totally mundane. So the drone at the center of these intelligence reports is the Shahed 136, or in Russian service, they call it the Geran 2.
Right.
It has a delta wing design, so it essentially looks like a large flying triangle. And it carries over 100 pounds of explosives right in its nose.
Which is a significant payload.
Oh, massive.
Yeah.
But the staggering part is the range. It has an estimated range of 1,500 to 2,500 kilometers.
Yeah, that's up to like 1,500 miles.
Exactly. But its top speed is only about 115 miles per hour. It flies incredibly low to the ground. It has zero cameras or sensors for like dynamic targeting. And it's powered by a conventional four-cylinder piston engine. I think it's the Iranian-made Emido MD-550.
Yes, the MD-550, which analysts have actually identified as a reverse-engineered German civilian engine.
Wow.
And that specific engine is exactly why it sounds like a flying lawnmower. I mean, in traditional military thinking, having that obnoxious noise is a glaring tactical weakness.
Because you can hear it coming.
Exactly. It alerts targets on the ground from miles away that a strike is incoming. Plus, it has no stealth coating whatsoever. It is entirely visible.
And it's launched using, what, a simple rocket assist off the back of a standard commercial pickup truck?
It's just a regular truck, yeah.
I just keep picturing an armed flying moped. It's loud, it's slow, and it uses off-the-shelf electronics. And actually, that brings up the navigation aspect. Because we're talking about global positioning systems running on low-grade commercial chips.
Right.
How are these sanctioned nations even getting their hands on American-made GPS technology to guide these things?
Well, they exploit the globalized commercial supply chain. I mean, these aren't restricted military-grade components we're talking about.
Okay.
They are the exact same dual-use microchips that you'd find in civilian navigation devices or automotive electronics, even home appliances.
Wait, like washing machines?
Basically, yeah. Sanctioned entities use these really complex networks of front companies in third-party countries to just buy this consumer tech in bulk. Then they strip the chips out and they integrate them directly into the drone's avionics.
Okay, so this is where I'm getting hung up. If this thing is so basic, I mean, it's loud, it's slow, it relies on smuggled washing machine chips, and it's totally unstealthy, why on earth is the aerospace community calling it a strategic nightmare?
It's a great question. The danger of the Shahed 136, it has nothing to do with its sophistication. The danger is entirely the economics.
The economics.
Yeah. This platform introduces a concept defense analysts call asymmetric economic warfare. So think of it like this. Imagine a knight in a suit of million-dollar armor, and he's being attacked by a massive swarm of cheap hornets.
Okay, I like this analogy.
Right, so the knight is heavily protected. He has a massive, expensive sword. He can easily kill the hornets. But he is going to exhaust himself and completely deplete his energy, swinging that heavy sword way before the swarm ever runs out.
Oh, wow. economic warfare.
Yeah.
So the damage isn't just whatever the 100-pound warhead blows up. The damage is the actual financial cost of stopping it.
Precisely. Let's break down the math on this because it's wild. Manufacturing a single Shahed 136 costs anywhere between $20,000 and $50,000.
Which is nothing.
In the realm of military aviation, it is absolute pocket change. But because it carries that heavy warhead and it can travel thousands of kilometers to hit, say, a power plant or a military base, a defending army simply cannot ignore it.
Right. You have to shoot it down.
You are forced to engage it. And modern militaries shoot down airborne threats using these highly advanced surface-to-air defense systems, like the Patriot missile battery, for instance.
And what goes into a Patriot missile that makes it the equivalent of that knight's heavy sword? Like, what's the cost?
Well, a single Patriot interceptor missile can cost anywhere from $2 to $4 million.
$4 million for one missile.
For one missile. And that price tag comes from the highly advanced technology that's required to guarantee a kill. You know, you are paying for sophisticated solid-state rocket fuel, these incredibly complex radar seeker heads that are built right into the tip of the missile, and of course, the vast research and development behind supersonic flight. Plus, you have to factor in the operating costs of the ground-based phased array radar stations and the years of training required for the personnel manning those batteries. So the Shahed basically forces a nation to use a $4 million silver bullet to destroy a $20,000 flying moped.
That is just a staggering return on investment for the attacker. I mean, they drain the defender's national budget and their finite missile stockpiles at the exact same time.
They really do. And furthermore, radar detection is a huge issue with these things, but not because of stealth technology.
Because they fly low.
Exactly. Traditional early warning radar systems, they're calibrated to track high-altitude supersonic threats, things like fighter jets or ballistic missiles. Because the Shahed flies at 115 miles per hour, just a few hundred feet off the ground, traditional Doppler radar often just filters it right out.
It filters it out like it doesn't even see it.
The software essentially categorizes it as ground clutter or maybe a flock of birds. Because if it didn't do that, the radar operator's screen would just be entirely white with false positives all day long.
So it slips through the net precisely because it's so low tech.
Yes.
And I imagine if an attacker launches them in massive swarms, like 30 or 40 at a time from a fleet of those pickup trucks, they can easily overwhelm that multi-million-dollar defense grid.
That's the core of the strategy. Historically, striking an adversary's infrastructure from thousands of kilometers away with lethal precision, that was a capability reserved exclusively for superpowers.
Right. You needed a massive military-industrial complex.
Exactly. You needed a billion-dollar cruise missile program or an entire fleet of advanced jet fighters. But that strategic capability has now been completely democratized by a $20,000 drone. The barrier to entry for long-range warfare has just collapsed entirely.
And applying that collapsed barrier to entry to geography is really where this current crisis takes shape, because the Shahed 136, as you said, has a 2,500-kilometer range. If you place a launch pad in Cuba, you are just 90 miles from Key West.
Right.
A 2,500-kilometer radius doesn't just put the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in range. I mean, it puts all of Florida, the entire Gulf Coast, Washington, D.C., and even as far north as New York within striking distance of a cheap, low-flying swarm.
And that geographic vulnerability is exactly the focal point of these recent classified U.S. intelligence reports that Axios just cited.
Yeah, let's get into the reports.
So the intelligence claims that Cuba has actually acquired over 300 of these drones from Russia and Iran since 2023, and they're allegedly distributing them across strategic, hidden locations all over the island.
The political alarm bells in Washington right now are deafening. Just recently, at an event in Miami hosted by the bipartisan group United Against Nuclear Iran, you had figures like former Florida Governor Jeb Bush and Representative Carlos Jimenez. And they literally physically stood next to a life-size mock-up of the Shahed 136 on stage.
Really trying to drive the point home visually.
Exactly. They were trying to demonstrate the scale of what is reportedly sitting just across the Florida Straits. And Gibbon has made this really poignant point. He said that even if a U.S. defense grid intercepts 99% of a swarm, if a single drone gets through to a power plant or a population center, It's an absolute disaster.
And it's not just the hardware that's concerning officials. Intelligence sources indicate that Cuban military personnel are actively studying Iranian drone warfare tactics right now.
So they're not just storing them.
No, they aren't just warehousing these systems. They are allegedly building the operational doctrine to deploy them. And they're drawing directly on Iran's firsthand experience in resisting U.S. and allied forces.
Which brings up the human element here, which is just incredible to me. Reports are estimating that up to 5,000 Cuban soldiers have actually fought for Russia in the ongoing war in Ukraine.
Yes.
And Moscow is apparently paying Havana about $25,000 a head for these recruits.
Which is just an astronomical sum in the context of the Cuban economy today. That payment represents a lifetime of earnings for an average citizen there. So it creates this overwhelming economic incentive to deploy.
So you have thousands of Cuban troops who are over there gaining firsthand, battle-tested experience in modern trench and drone warfare. They're fighting alongside Russian forces, deploying these exact same Iranian-designed drones we're talking about, and then they were bringing that tactical knowledge directly back to Havana.
It potentially creates a highly experienced, combat-hardened cadre of drone operators sitting just 90 miles from the United States coastline.
Which, okay, this brings up a massive contradiction for me. I want to play devil's advocate for the listener here.
Sure.
I look at Cuba right now, and the country is facing its worst internal crisis in 60 years. Just in 2026 alone, their national power grid has suffered total collapse 4 separate times. It left 10 million people sitting in the dark.
Yeah, the infrastructure's crumbling.
Completely. And between 2022 and 2023, over 1 million Cubans fled the island due to a severe lack of food, medicine, fuel. The state is virtually bankrupt. So why would a financially ruined government risk provoking the most powerful military on Earth by importing Iranian weapons? I mean, it just feels totally suicidal.
It's a really valid question. But analyzing the geopolitical leverage at play answers that contradiction.
Okay.
Defense analysts, and this includes the folks contributing to these intel reports, they largely agree that Cuba is highly, highly unlikely to ever launch an unprovoked kinetic strike on U.S. soil.
Because they know what would happen.
Exactly. The retaliatory consequences from the United States military would be immediate, they would be chaotic, and they would almost certainly result in the total dismantling of the current Cuban government.
Right. So if they know they can't actually fire them without being completely wiped out, what is the point of buying 300 of them?
Survival. It's about strategic alliances. Cuba is aggressively positioning itself right now as the Western Hemisphere anchor for a burgeoning anti-U.S. bloc. Specifically, they're aligning their interests with Russia, China, and Iran.
Right.
Cuba's most valuable asset isn't its economy, obviously. It is its geography. They are trading their proximity to the United States. So by allowing these heavily sanctioned autocracies to project power and gather intelligence right near the American coast, Havana receives the economic lifelines, the credit, the oil, and the energy support it desperately needs just to keep the regime functioning.
Wow. So it's a raw transaction. They offer up their territory as a forward operating base, and in exchange, Iran and Russia literally keep the lights on in Havana.
Yeah. And we can actually track the financial footprint of this strategy. Over the last decade, Iran has supported Cuba with annual credit lines ranging between $200 and $500 million.
That's
Very. And recently, the two nations signed strategic agreements that actually allow Iran to utilize Cuban naval infrastructure and their telecommunications networks. So Cuba is just leasing its geography as a strategic platform to avoid total state collapse.
Well, if Cuba is willing to lease its geography to sanctioned autocracies, it makes me wonder how widespread this issue is. Because looking at the recent posture statement from the U.S. Southern Command Southcom, it suggests this is absolutely not isolated to just one island.
No, not at all. The Southcom statement paints a picture of this methodical, regional encroachment by authoritarian regimes throughout Latin America and the Caribbean.
Yeah, what stood out in that report?
The report specifically highlights the active presence of the Iranian Quds Force.
Which is the elite paramilitary wing, right?
Yes, the espionage and paramilitary wing of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as well as Lebanese Hezbollah, which is a heavily armed militant group backed by Tehran. Also, keep in mind, Iran recently joined BRICS.
Right, the economic bloc with Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, designed to counter Western financial dominance.
Exactly. So they're using diplomatic and economic channels to establish physical footholds across the region. In 2023, Iran sent warships for a port call in Brazil. They were testing their ability to project naval power into the Western Hemisphere before those vessels circumnavigated the globe. And furthermore, Iran has actually deployed the Mohajer 6 drone to a military base in Venezuela.
Wait, how does the Mohajer 6 differ from the Shahed we discussed earlier? Because there are so many drones flying around in this conversation.
Yeah, it's important to distinguish them. The Shahed is a single-use kamikaze drone. It hits a target and blows up. The Mohajer 6 is a medium-altitude, long-endurance platform designed for repeated use.
Okay, so more like an American Predator drone.
Very much like that. It conducts extensive surveillance, and it actually carries precision-guided Coim bombs and Almas anti-armor missiles. So Iran is actively arming Venezuela with advanced strike capabilities while simultaneously providing drones, riverboats, and cybersecurity assistance to Bolivia.
It's a full hemispheric strategy. And Cellcom also details how Russia and China are operating advanced signals intelligence facilities in Cuba. What does a signals intelligence facility actually do in this context? Like, what are they listening to?
Signals intelligence, or SIGINT, it basically involves intercepting electronic communications and radar emissions. By placing these facilities in Cuba, just 90 miles away, Russian and Chinese operatives can effectively vacuum up a massive spectrum of data.
Like what kind of data?
Well, they can monitor naval communications coming out of Key West, they can track the radar frequencies of U.S. military aircraft operating over the Gulf of Mexico, and they can potentially even intercept sensitive commercial or government communications routing right through Florida's telecommunications infrastructure.
That is incredibly concerning. And while all this encroachment is happening, the Southcom report points out a glaring vulnerability. The United States is facing a severe resource gap in its own hemisphere. The report explicitly states they are currently operating with 0 Navy P-8 maritime patrol aircraft to monitor these threats. 0.
Yeah, that is a big deal. The P-8 Poseidon is a highly advanced aircraft. It's designed for submarine hunting, maritime surveillance, and intelligence gathering. Operating with 0 P-8s in the Southern Command signifies a massive blind spot.
How does that happen?
The U.S. military is heavily extended right now. They're focusing their primary resources on the Indo-Pacific theater to counter China, Eastern Europe to monitor Russia, and obviously the Middle East. Southcom is explicitly warning that while Washington's attention is focused outward, adversaries are exploiting the lack of American military presence to set up shop in America's near abroad.
And this geographic encroachment, it's fueling the immediate high-stakes escalation we are seeing out of Washington right now. I mean, President Donald Trump addressed this directly from the Oval Office. He confirmed the U.S. is actively investigating the intelligence regarding these Iranian drones in Cuba, and he issued a stark warning.
He did.
He stated that if the reports are verified, the U.S. will, quote, take care of it in short order.
And it is crucial to note here, impartially, that both the U.S. administration and the broader intelligence community have framed this as an ongoing investigation.
Right, they haven't declassified photos yet.
Exactly. They haven't publicly released concrete photographic evidence of the drone's presence in Cuba yet. However, Trump's warning carries immense weight because of the broader military context in which it was delivered.
Yeah, because on the exact same afternoon he issued that warning about Cuba, U.S. Central Command launched a third massive wave of airstrikes against Iran.
Right.
They destroyed over 300 targets after accusing Tehran of breaching a ceasefire in the Strait of Hormuz. So we aren't just talking about diplomatic tensions here. The U.S. and Iran are actively engaged in kinetic military confrontation.
And the diplomatic pressure campaign operating parallel to these military strikes is intense. CIA Director John Ratcliffe recently made a rare, unannounced visit to Havana to meet directly with top Cuban officials.
To deliver a message, I assume.
A very blunt one. Sources indicate he warned that Cuba can no longer serve as a platform for America's adversaries, warning against any hostile activity or further technological integration with Iran.
And on top of that, the Department of Justice is reportedly preparing to unseal an indictment against the de facto leader of Cuba, 94-year-old Raul Castro, over his alleged involvement in the 1996 shoot-down of the brothers to the rescue humanitarian planes. And the State Department just sanctioned multiple Cuban entities.
They are turning the screws.
Washington is squeezing Havana from every conceivable angle: military threats, diplomatic visits, judicial indictments.
The sheer volume of simultaneous pressure, it indicates that while Washington publicly states they're still verifying the intelligence, defense planners are clearly treating the potential presence of these weapons as a severe, credible threat that must be countered immediately.
And this intense reaction is exactly why officials and analysts keep invoking the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, that comparison keeps coming up.
I really want to unpack that comparison because, as U.S. officials readily acknowledge in these reports, we aren't talking about nuclear warheads capable of vaporizing cities. We aren't even talking about advanced fighter jets. We are talking about slow, prop-driven drones. Are consumer-grade drones genuinely a comparable threat to nuclear annihilation?
It's an important distinction. To understand the comparison, we have to look at the doctrine of geographic security. A Shahed 136 absolutely does not pose an apocalyptic, civilization-ending threat like the Soviet ballistic missiles did in 1962.
Right.
However, what these drone swarms represent is a new reality of constant low-level vulnerability. Historically, the United States has relied on the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans as these massive geographic moats, providing absolute security from conventional foreign attacks.
But that 2,000-mile buffer is completely gone if a swarm of 300 kamikaze drones is sitting just 90 miles away.
Exactly. Even without nuclear payloads, a coordinated swarm strike could devastate critical civilian infrastructure. I mean, they could overwhelm the air defenses of naval assets stationed in Florida, cripple regional power grids, or target commercial shipping lanes in the Gulf. In the minds of defense planners, it is the proximity of a hostile mass strike capability that makes the 1962 comparison highly relevant. It shatters the illusion of North American invulnerability.
So how is the Cuban government responding to these accusations and all this mounting pressure from Washington?
The leadership in Havana is issuing strong, categorical denials regarding any offensive intentions. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel utilized social media to explicitly state that Cuba does not represent a threat to the United States. Furthermore, the Cuban foreign minister invoked the United Nations Charter, asserting Cuba's sovereign right to legitimate self-defense and the right to acquire military hardware to protect its borders from external aggression.
So they aren't explicitly confirming the presence of the Shahed drones, but they are aggressively defending their sovereign right to arm themselves however they see fit.
Yes. The Cuban government is characterizing the U.S. intelligence reports as a manufactured false narrative. They claim it's designed specifically to justify the imposition of even tougher economic sanctions, or perhaps to manufacture consent for direct military intervention.
Which is a heavy accusation.
And Díaz-Canel issued a stark, severe warning of his own, stating that any U.S. military action against the island would lead to a catastrophic, quote, bloodbath with incalculable consequences for regional peace across the Caribbean.
Wow. So we are looking at a situation where the active U.S.-Iran conflict in the Middle East and all the tactical lessons of the proxy war with Russia and Ukraine are just converging. The exact same weapons, the same tactics, the global alliances from those conflicts are allegedly being exported to a collapsing state just a few dozen miles from the American coastline.
It perfectly demonstrates a fundamental structural shift in global power dynamics. Economic isolation and crippling sanctions are no longer preventing adversarial nations from projecting hard, effective military power.
Right. So, to summarize this for you all listening, we are witnessing a historic turning point in military technology. Cheap, accessible, consumer-grade components like those found in the Shahed 136 have completely rewritten the rules of engagement. Sanctioned nations no longer need billion-dollar defense budgets to create massive geopolitical headaches right on America's doorstep. They just need the global supply chain, some reverse engineering, and a willing partner who's desperate for economic survival.
And as we monitor how Washington and Havana navigate this incredibly tense standoff, there is a chilling new angle to consider regarding this democratization of warfare.
No, with that.
Well, we discussed how these drones currently rely on smuggled commercial GPS chips to navigate.
Yeah, the washing machine chip.
Right. But what happens to global security when open source artificial intelligence is fully integrated into these cheap platforms?
Oh, wow.
Think about it. If a $20,000 drone can use AI to navigate autonomously via optical terrain mapping, it completely severs its reliance on GPS. That makes it utterly impossible to jam electronically. If that happens, the concept of a defensive perimeter might just cease to exist entirely.
That changes the math all over again. A swarm that doesn't need a signal, doesn't need a pilot, and can't be jammed, launching from just 90 miles away. That's a lot to think about. Listen, if you found this deep dive as fascinating as we did, be sure to like, share, follow, and comment on my channel, U.S. Affairs, to stay updated on this situation and more.
You know, When you picture the weapons that define like modern global superpowers, you usually think of things that look like they belong in a sci-fi movie.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
You're visualizing the absolute pinnacle of uh, highly classified, cutting-edge aerospace engineering.
Right. Exacta. Like the billion-dollar stealth bombers, laser-guided supersonic missiles, things that are just incredibly sleek, super quiet, and I mean impossibly expensive.
Right, the kind of tech that demands the GDP of a small country just to develop,
Yeah.
and a massive military-industrial complex just to maintain it.
Yeah, but the geopolitical crisis we are looking at today, it completely flips that script.
Right.
We're looking at a weapon that is remarkably loud, relatively slow, and honestly built with components you could pull out of a commercial shipping container.
Yeah, it's wild.
But this seemingly low-tech machine is currently at the center of a massive geopolitical showdown happening just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. So welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. Today, we are looking at a core burning question. How does a relatively cheap drone from the Middle East suddenly become the focal point of a modern missile crisis in the Caribbean?
It's a situation that demands a total pivot in how we analyze modern warfare, uh, supply chains, and just global security in general.
Totally. And to figure this out, we are synthesizing a really wide array of data for you today. We're integrating a dense aerospace engineering paper on the Hassa Shahid 136 drone, plus deep dive intelligence reports from JINSA detailing Iran's drone arsenal.
And we're also pulling from a stack of breaking news dispatches from July 2026 stuff from the Statesman and Sociedad Media regarding the situation between Washington and Havana.
Right. And I want to make this super clear right up front. Our mission here isn't to validate the political rhetoric from either the left or the right or, to endorse any government's official stance. There are some politically charged claims in these sources.
Oh, definitely. Heavy rhetoric from both sides.
Exactly. So we are just here to strip away that noise and impartially decode the mechanics, the economics, and the strategy driving this hyper-modern standoff, just reporting the ideas contained in the source material.
Yeah, we'll serve as your guides through that data. We'll analyze the physical engineering of the weapons themselves, and then get into the historical context behind these escalating diplomatic claims.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand the panic we're seeing in the intelligence community right now, we first have to understand the machine itself. We keep hearing about the Shahid 136 in these aerospace reports.
Right.
But on paper, it really doesn't look like a revolutionary piece of technology. So why is it causing such a strategic nightmare?
What's fascinating here is that the Shahid 136 isn't revolutionary because of its technological sophistication. It's revolutionary because of the brutal economic logic it brings to the battlefield.
Okay, what do you mean by economic logic?
Well, previously, if a military wanted to hit a strategic target with precision from, say, 2,000 kilometers away, the barrier to entry was astronomical.
Right, you needed a cruise missile.
Exactly. A highly advanced cruise missile or a sophisticated stealth aircraft. And those platforms cost millions of dollars per unit.
Which basically leaves that capability strictly in the hands of a few dominant superpowers.
Precisely. The Shahid 136 completely shatters that monopoly. It utilizes the core logic of asymmetric warfare by relying on consumer-grade technology to wage, basically, an economic war of attrition.
Wow.
The goal is no longer to build the single most unstoppable weapon. It's an arms race to see who can produce the absolute least expensive weapon that can still deliver a payload to a target.
Because if it's cheap enough, you can just build thousands of them.
Exactly. The design philosophy is to overwhelm highly advanced enemy air defenses by sheer volume. When you launch a massive swarm of these, the defender is forced to use $1 million surface-to-air interceptor to shoot down a drone that maybe cost tens of thousands of dollars to build.
Oh, man. So the defender basically goes bankrupt just trying to protect themselves?
Yeah, the math is totally against them.
That economic asymmetry is just wild. So let's dig into the actual engineering that makes this cheap efficiency possible. The aerospace data focuses heavily on the aerodynamics, specifically the delta wing design.
Right.
Just looking at the schematics they provided, it basically looks like a giant flying triangle.
Yeah.
To me, it seems less like a traditional aircraft and more like a flying fuel tank with wings glued on.
That is actually a highly accurate way to visualize its structural efficiency. A delta wing configuration provides a massive internal volume relative to its overall wing area.
Because it doesn't have a normal body, right?
Right. It lacks a traditional fuselage and tail section, so almost the entire internal structure can be dedicated to fuel storage and the explosive payload.
It maximizes the payload to weight ratio. But what about the actual flight mechanics? I imagine a tailless flying triangle isn't exactly the most agile thing in the sky.
Well, agility really isn't the objective here. Stability is. Delta wings have these unique aerodynamic properties, specifically what the paper calls a low-lift curve slope.
Okay, meaning what in practical terms?
In practical terms, it means the drone is much less sensitive to sudden changes in its angle of attack. So if it gets hit by a really strong gust of wind, a traditional wing might experience a sudden spike in lift, which throws the aircraft totally off course.
Oh, got it.
But the delta wing absorbs that disturbance much more smoothly.
Meaning it doesn't need a highly complex, multi-million-dollar avionics system constantly making micro adjustments just to keep it flying straight in crosswind.
Exactly. It remains stable mechanically rather than digitally.
Yeah.
Furthermore, the Delta design is highly resistant to stalling at lower airspeeds, which is super vital for a drone that is essentially cruising at the speed of a Cessna.
Right. Which brings us to the propulsion system. And I gotta say, this is where the engineering seems almost counterintuitive for a weapon of war.
Yes.
Well, the data states it uses a pusher configuration with a piston engine at the back. Specifically, the MADO MD550, which is basically a reverse-engineered clone of a four-cylinder German commercial engine.
Yeah, it's just a standard internal combustion gas engine.
But the combat reports from Ukraine consistently note how incredibly loud it is. Troops on the ground literally hear it coming from miles away.
Call it the moped in the sky.
Right. So if you are building a kamikaze drone meant to slip past defenses, why on earth would you use a loud gas-guzzling engine? I mean, we have incredibly advanced whisper-quiet electric motors now. Wouldn't a battery-powered stealth approach make infinitely more sense?
It really seems like it would until you run into the harsh reality of physics and endurance. The aerospace analysis draws heavily on mathematical models, specifically Voschiel's equations, which they mention in the source.
Okay, what do those do?
They calculate flight endurance by balancing the mass of the energy source against the required thrust over time. And when you apply those equations, the energy density of gasoline vastly outperforms modern lithium-ion batteries.
Wait, really? Even factoring in the weight of the combustion engine itself?
Even then, the specific energy of aviation fuel is astronomically higher than a battery.
Yeah.
If you wanted to keep a 200-kilogram object in the air for 2,000 kilometers using an electric motor,
Yeah.
the required battery would be so massive that the drone either wouldn't be able to get off a launch rail or you'd literally have to remove the entire explosive warhead just to carry the battery.
Wow.
Yeah, for extreme endurance combined with a heavy payload, combustion is currently the only mathematically viable option.
So they happily trade acoustic stealth for raw distance.
Exactly.
And speaking of getting it off the launch rail, the deployment mechanism is another layer of this asymmetric strategy. They use a RADO system, right?
Yeah, rocket-assisted takeoff.
Launching it off a simple rail with a solid rocket booster that falls away once the piston engine kicks in. You don't even need a runway. You just need a pickup truck with a rail bolted to the bed.
It offers unparalleled tactical mobility. You can launch a swarm from, like, a forest clearing and move the trucks before the adversary can even trace the launch origin.
But here is the detail in the engineering analysis that truly changes the geopolitical landscape, I think. When intelligence agencies analyze the debris of these drones, they aren't finding highly classified proprietary military technology.
Not at all.
They are finding standard commercial fuel pumps manufactured in Poland and the United Kingdom.
Yeah, that is the supply chain reality of this new era. These are low-specification, consumer-grade components used in civilian industries globally.
Just everyday stuff.
Exactly. And the analysis explicitly notes that it is politically and diplomatically unfeasible to track or heavily regulate the distribution of these ubiquitous parts.
Because they're in everything.
Right. They are purchased legally through shell companies and easily smuggled through intermediate hubs, largely bypassing international arms embargoes.
The sheer ubiquity of those commercial parts is exactly what enables the next phase of this. Because Iran hasn't just used this cheap supply chain to build a stockpile for their own military, right? They've weaponized the manufacturing model itself to project power globally.
The cost-effectiveness of this engineering allows for mass production on a scale that fundamentally alters regional power dynamics.
Yeah, when you look at the intelligence data mapping out Iran's unmanned aerial vehicle program from JINSA, the sheer variety is staggering. It is a comprehensive catalog of power projection.
Oh, yeah.
They have the Mohajer 4 for dedicated intelligence and surveillance with a 150-kilometer range. They have the Karar 1 combat drone hitting 1,000 kilometers, and then you have the Command 22 boasting a 3,000-kilometer reach.
The evolution of their drone program, which really started accelerating since the mid-2000s, shows a highly structured approach to developing diverse capabilities, like reconnaissance, loitering munitions, and direct attack platforms.
But the Shahed 136 really remains the centerpiece of this current crisis. The intelligence estimates place its operational range at roughly 2,200 to 2,500 kilometers.
It's massive.
Just to put the threat radius of that consumer-grade technology into perspective for you, that is a machine capable of flying over 1,000 miles at around 115 miles per hour, carrying over 100 pounds of high explosives, all guided by commercial satellite navigation.
It delivers the strategic reach of a sophisticated cruise missile.
Yeah.
But because it relies on those untraceable commercial parts, it can be exported in massive quantities. And this is the core of Iran's proxy strategy.
Yeah, the intelligence maps clearly show these systems are not confined to Iranian borders. They are actively deployed by the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas, and various militia groups operating across Syria and Iraq.
But the mechanism of that export is crucial to understand. They don't just hand over the exact domestic models. They supply what are known as proxy variants.
Okay, like,
Models like the Kosef series or the Ababil T. Mechanically, these are often slightly modified or stripped-down versions of the original Iranian designs. But politically, they are rebranded by the proxy groups.
oh, creating a deliberate layer of plausible deniability.
Exactly. It allows Iran to arm allied militias, enabling those groups to launch highly disruptive strikes against strategic targets, like commercial shipping lanes or regional military bases, while Tehran maintains the diplomatic fiction that they are not directly involved.
It's power projection without direct state-on-state confrontation.
Spot on.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the intelligence sources we are decoding today show that this strategy of exporting cheap, asymmetrical power is no longer confined to the Middle East.
Nope.
It is actively expanding into the Western Hemisphere, which brings us to the rapidly escalating situation in Cuba.
Right. If Iran's overarching geopolitical strategy relies on cementing alliances and supplying accessible military technology to project influence, their deepening relationship with Cuba is a logical, albeit highly alarming progression for policymakers in Washington.
Yeah, and this alliance isn't some sudden development. The diplomatic timeline from the Diálogo Americas article shows that Tehran and Havana have maintained mutual support for 40 years.
Very long history.
We are looking at a relationship where Iran consistently provides Cuba with revolving credit lines ranging from $200 million to $500 million annually.
It is a deeply entrenched economic partnership.
Mm-hmm.
But the data highlights a flurry of very recent, highly strategic escalations. For example, in November 2024, a specialized Iranian technology delegation visited Cuba.
Okay.
This was immediately followed in January 2025 by senior officials meeting in Tehran to formalize a decade-long strategic partnership. And then a month later, Havana hosted the 19th Commission on Economic Cooperation.
And perhaps the most significant logistical development is an agreement signed in May 2024. This pact reportedly grants Iran the right to utilize Cuban naval infrastructure to service South American nations, with a very specific, stated emphasis on Venezuela, another vital ally in Iran's network.
Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, intelligence analysts describe this growing network as an axis of influence. Cuba is effectively positioning itself as the primary Latin American hub for a strategic axis that heavily involves China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran.
But we have to factor in the local economic reality driving Cuba's calculations here, right? The reporting highlights that Cuba is currently enduring its most severe internal crisis in over 6 decades. They are facing critical energy shortages and just massive economic deterioration.
Right.
So when a partner like Iran arrives, offering hundreds of millions in credit, advanced telecommunications infrastructure, and lucrative port service agreements, Havana has intense domestic motivation to solidify those ties.
Severe economic desperation creates a highly fertile environment for these types of strategic alliances. These nations are aligning their interests to insulate themselves against international sanctions, utilizing their combined geography and resources to bypass Western economic pressure.
Which brings us directly to the acute security crisis dominating the July 2026 news cycle. We are transitioning from economic commissions and naval agreements to a massive, immediate intelligence standoff.
Yeah, this is the moment where that long-term strategic and economic alliance manifests as a direct, tangible security threat.
The breaking reports from multiple global news outlets, Axios, The Statesman, Sociedad Media detail a severe intelligence claim originating from U.S. officials. They assert that Cuba has acquired over 300 military drones from Russia and Iran since 2023.
Wow.
And crucially, this stockpile allegedly includes the Shahed 136.
The exact loitering munition we just analyzed. A weapon with an operational range exceeding 2,000 kilometers.
Yeah, the geography of that claim is terrifying when you map out the threat radius. Stationed in Cuba, a drone with that endurance isn't just a localized Caribbean issue.
Not at all.
It can effortlessly reach the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base, it can reach Key West, it can reach Miami. Representative Carlos Jimenez actually highlighted intelligence suggesting these weapons have the reach to strike as far north as New York.
New York from Cuba.
Yeah. As he bluntly noted, it only takes one successful strike carrying 100 pounds of explosives to cause catastrophic damage to civilian or military infrastructure.
The proximity of Cuba, just 90 miles from the continental United States, is what makes the introduction of this specific technology so incredibly volatile.
Right. Now, true to our mission here, we need to impartially examine how both sides are navigating this escalating rhetoric based purely on the reporting. Let's look at the U.S. response first. The intelligence claims have triggered immediate high-level reactions. President Trump confirmed the active investigation directly from the Oval Office, issuing a stark public warning. He said, "We'll take care of it in short order. We're not going to have a problem. We're not going to allow that to happen."
And that rhetoric is being echoed across the political spectrum. You have figures like former Governor Jeb Bush and Ambassador Mark Wallace sounding public alarms. Furthermore, the reports indicate CIA Director John Ratcliffe recently made a rare, unannounced trip to Havana to deliver direct warnings to the Cuban leadership.
And the wider geopolitical context makes this even more precarious. This warning regarding Cuba is unfolding at the exact same time the U.S. Central Command executed strikes on over 300 targets in Iran.
Right, following accusations that Tehran breached a critical ceasefire in the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, so the global temperature is boiling. So how is Havana responding to these massive intelligence claims?
With absolute categorical denial of any aggressive intent.
According to the dispatches, Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez released a statement completely rejecting the allegations. He asserted that Cuba neither threatens nor desires war with any nation.
Right.
The Cuban government is formally accusing the United States of fabricating a fraudulent case specifically designed to justify the continuation of ruthless economic sanctions and, lay the groundwork for potential military aggression.
They are framing their entire military posture as strictly defensive, falling completely under their protected rights within the UN Charter. The Cuban embassy has echoed its sentiment too, accusing the U.S. of inventing pretexts for hostility.
Interesting.
However, it is vital to note that in these diplomatic rebuttals, they fiercely deny the intent to attack, but they haven't explicitly confirmed or denied the physical presence of the drones themselves on the island.
Oh, that's a key distinction. So we have a massive intelligence claim of 300 drones, stern public warnings from the Oval Office, a CIA visit, and a complete rejection of hostile intent from Havana accusing the U.S. of manufacturing a crisis.
This raises an important question regarding historical precedents.
Yeah.
It is virtually impossible for any intelligence analyst or historian to look this standoff in the Caribbean and not hear the distinct echoes of October 1962.
The Cuban Missile Crisis,
Yeah.
the ultimate Cold War standoff.
Precisely. However, the introduction of modern drone warfare fundamentally alters that Cold War calculus. In 1962, the discovery of Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba presented a binary threat, right? Apocalyptic thermonuclear annihilation. It was a standoff built on the doctrine of mutually assured destruction.
But the Shahed 136 isn't a nuclear weapon.
And that is exactly what makes it such an insidious strategic challenge. These drones are cheap, they're conventional, and they are engineered explicitly for asymmetrical warfare. The threat isn't mutually assured destruction. The threat is the ability to constantly harass, disrupt, and economically exhaust a superpower's air defenses with a relentless swarm of cheap machines.
Right.
Furthermore, the intelligence reports noted deeply concerning tactical development. Cuban soldiers have been actively fighting alongside Russian forces in Ukraine.
Wait, meaning they aren't just acquiring the hardware. They are potentially acquiring the modern doctrine.
Yes.
They are learning how to deploy these exact swarm tactics on a live, highly contested battlefield and bringing that firsthand knowledge back to the Caribbean.
They are importing both the technology and the tactical playbook.
So what does this all mean? We are essentially witnessing a hyper-modern geopolitical standoff. carrying all the geographical tension of the darkest days of the Cold War, but fueled by consumer-grade drone technology rather than ballistic nuclear warheads.
It represents a total paradigm shift in global security. It proves that international threat levels are no longer solely dictated by which nation possesses the most aircraft carriers or the largest underground nuclear silos.
Absolutely. Well, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground on this deep dive today. We started with the sheer mathematics, the aerodynamic stability of a tailless delta wing and the raw energy density required to keep a gas-powered drone in the air for thousands of
Right.
kilometers. We traced how Iran weaponized the cheapness of that engineering to build a global proxy empire, distributing variants to allies while maintaining deniability. And we followed that strategic export model right into a tense, unfolding diplomatic crisis in the Caribbean, where U.S. and Cuban officials are locked in a high-stakes battle of intelligence claims and firm denials.
And this matters to you, the listener, because it clearly demonstrates how accessible technology is rapidly erasing traditional borders and legacy security guarantees. Cheap, commercially derived engineering can now cross oceans and alter the balance of power, fundamentally changing the map of who represents a credible threat to whom.
Which leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with, something to mull over that builds on the incredible journey these sources took us on today.
Yeah.
Think back to those fuel pumps we discussed during the engineering breakdown, the ones found deep inside the wreckage of these weapons. The intelligence highlighted that they were simple, commercial parts manufactured in Europe, completely impossible to track because they are just so staggeringly common.
Ubiquitous.
Right. If the most geopolitically disruptive weapons on the modern battlefield are being assembled from the exact same everyday global supply chains that build our lawnmowers, our delivery scooters, and our consumer electronics, it means the front lines of the new global arms race aren't hidden away in secret, multi-billion-dollar underground military labs anymore. They are sitting in our commercial shipping containers and on the shelves of our local hardware markets.
The commercial supply chain itself has quietly become the world's most expansive arsenal.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the headlines, keep exploring the facts, and we'll see you next time.